Welcome to the Pop Cult Podcast. Here are your hosts, Ariana and Seth.
This is the Pop Cult Podcast. I'm Seth.
I'm Ariana.
And today we'll be talking about two new-ish releases. We'll be talking about All Dirt Road's Taste of Salt a little later. But first, we're going to be talking about the Finnish film, Fallen Leaves. The concept of the film is modern-day Helsinki is the home to two lonely souls that meet in a karaoke bar and try to build a relationship. Their path to happiness is beset by obstacles, from lost phone numbers to mistaken addresses, alcoholism, and a charming stray dog. This is the latest film from director Aki Kaurismäki, who is a Finnish director. We've only ever seen one of his other films. I believe it's called Le Chèvre, I think. I'm going to look at it. Le Havre, that's what it was. Which was about a town in northern France and a dock worker who uncovers an African refugee boy and kind of takes him in.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the most striking thing about that film to me was the visual style. It looked like a movie that had been made in the 60s. Like the lighting, the framing of shots, like everything about it looked like an old movie.
Yeah.
So, Ariana, what did you think of Fallen Leaves?
I thought it was a good film. It's not a film that I would have to see by the end of the year. Did it stick to my brain? Because I think, unfortunately, it's one of those that just might get muddled in between the other movies that we watched. However, I think the one part that will quickly remind me of this film is the texture of the film that is similar to the prior film that we mentioned, which it feels like it's set in the 1970s, 1980s.
Dirt Road's Taste of Salt?
No. The prior film.
Oh, Le Havre. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's a good texture of that. He has a good ability to hold back, like refraining from having any type of like modern technology show up unless it's necessary.
Yes. That immediately makes me think of the laptop scene, which was a very odd scene because at one point, Ansa, the female lead character, goes to her electricity goes out because she's lost her job, and she goes to a like cafe / computer place where you can like use a public computer. And then he pulls a laptop out from behind the counter. And I wasn't expecting that. But I'm thinking that must be like a thing in at least Finland. Because I'm used to there'd be like, a desktop or two over in the corner or something.
Yeah. And it was supposed to be an internet cafe. So it was interesting because even the labeling for the fonts that we used for it was an old school kind of font. It's not modern. It's not a little billboard or a little like printed out thing. It is painted on the windows, be internet cafe to pull up a laptop, and then like maybe within the last 20 minutes we see a cell phone.
Yeah.
And there's so much restraint on that. The restraint of like not having her have a modern looking radio, the restraint of like not seeing them scrolling through their phones.
But I'm wondering if that's reflective, and I don't know because I don't know much about Finland. I haven't seen a lot of Finnish films. I think Hatching, the horror film.
But that one did show like,
that was more modern, I felt like. But it makes me wonder
social media and stuff like that.
What is modern urban life like in Finland? I don't know.
Or it could just be like, this is the style that he
likes.
likes.
That's true. I really like this movie. And I hate romantic comedies.
Yes, you do.
And I really liked this. I liked that it was a working class romantic comedy.
Yeah.
And the film is very obvious, and that's what it's trying to be. The final line of the movie kind of is the nail that's what this is whenever he asks her the name of her dog and she says Chaplin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it felt like a Charlie Chaplin style movie in that the stakes were not immense. The comedy was not over the top. There weren't like lavish set pieces and big sight gags.
Mm-hmm.
It was just kind of the comedy of human interaction and the comedy of the way fate feels like it can kind of ruin opportunities. And then also like I believe his name was Jalapa.
Yeah.
The male lead. His arrogance causes a problem at one point. His refusal to like reflect on what he's doing and change causes the
Yeah.
relationship to have like suffer a further gap kind of thing.
Yes, because it's sort of like you are left in this like, will they, won't they, which you struggle upon about them missing each other at opportune moments. It's like, oh, had he been there an hour later, she was going to show up. Or had she showed up earlier, or had she like gone there on a daily basis, she would have seen him. This lingering around each other, like orbiting around one another in hopes that they would meet, only for the time that they finally are with each other, that like his arrogance puts basically like impedes on their path to like unification.
That aspect of it reminded me a lot of Jacques Demy,
Yeah.
particularly the Young Girls of Roquefort,
Mm-hmm.
and the way they have that relationship between Catherine Deneuve and the sailor that keeps painting her because
Yeah.
he sees her in his dreams, and how they keep almost crossing paths.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is a very common trope in what I consider like good romantic comedies, is this sort of waiting for the hand of fate to bring the two people together thing,
Mm-hmm.
because it creates tension that doesn't feel out of place.
Yes.
It's the tension that you want to feel in those things where it's like, oh, you're just keep getting frustrated that like they were so close.
And I think it's also like this amusing thing that their friends aren't there to be like, yeah, you should totally follow this person, or encouraging them or trying to help them figure it out. Their friends are sort of involved in their own lives in order to do that. Like Ansa's friend is kind of like, he's not a big deal. He seems like a scoundrel. Why would he ever date him? Like she's upset that Ansa is like so put off by what's going on. And meanwhile, his friend,
Otari.
Hutari, who's like completely self-involved himself. Like he's sort of like, he tells him like, you need to do something about your life. You need to do something. But in the meantime, I'm really sad that I gave this remarkable performance in karaoke and no one's called me so I can make a tape. Like,
Yeah.
like I love that every time you meet him, he's like, and then that other girl thought that I was old, and I need to fix that because I'm not truly that old.
Well, the scene at the beginning where Huatari is convincing Jalapa to go out to karaoke, and like it's one of those places where you just see the great visual comedy of Kurosmaki, just putting on the sunglasses, and he's like this 50-something man thinks he's like a real cool dude. And it also there was a mention that I felt very like film nerdy. It's when they're leaving the theater and there's the two men coming out in front of them, and there's a poster for L'Argent, the Bresson film.
Yeah.
And they're talking about Bresson and the way does his movies and everything's so muted. And I was like, no, like this movie that we're watching right here, isn't it? But I do feel like Bresson clearly is an influence on Kurosmaki, but it's Kurosmaki's making movies that are, what if Bresson made comedies instead of dramas?
Yes.
Because the actors do have that aspect of being what Bresson would call models, where he just saw them as, you are there for me to pose and to deliver the lines,
Yeah.
and that the movie is about me and what I'm trying to say, rather than big sweeping performances. But that said, though, even these like muted, restrained performances are very endearing, and at no point do you ever find yourselves disliking the two main characters. I felt like I liked them as soon as I met them.
Yeah.
And the more I learned about them, the more I liked them, and I liked spending time with them.
Yeah, because it's sort of like they had good people that were around them. They had like good sense of self, even though at times like with Hulapa, is that how you say it?
Jalapa, yeah.
Palapa, like you would get frustrated with him because it's sort of like he was showing stubbornness where it wasn't necessary in order and complicating his life. Meanwhile, Ansa is like, she doesn't get her electricity cut off, but she sees the bill and immediately turns off everything, unplugs everything because her thing is like, okay, I have to go get a job now in order to survive. And like she doesn't cease to stop taking care of herself. And there's a great scene that in the first job that she happens to lose, that she has two friends that are kind of like, well, if you're going to fire her, what about us?
Well, I want to talk about that a little more because that's the working class aspect, which I really liked. in that no one has a boss that's worth a damn in this movie.
No.
And everyone's willing to tell a job to go fuck itself if that's what they have to. Because Ansa works at a supermarket at the beginning, and they make it very clear that there is a security guard that's kind of like keeping his eye on her.
Yeah, she's like sorting through the expired food.
And so when she goes out back one night to throw it away, there's a man comes up with a bag and asks if he can take some, and she's like, sure. And the security guard is, of course, there, which then cuts to the next scene where the boss is telling her to empty her bag. She has some expired food in it, and she's fired on the spot. And that's when we have her coworkers come in the solidarity. But there was two things I wanted to talk about this. There was the solidarity aspect of it, but then there was also the humanity of Ansa. Like the reason we see the scene of her letting that man take it is that communicates an idea about her to us.
Yeah.
This is a woman who understands that the rules exist for a purpose, often in antithesis to what's best for people.
Yeah.
And she's willing to overlook the rules in order to be kind to people.
Yes.
It's also a really great example of economical storytelling, which I think Chris Maki is like, if I wanted to teach someone economical storytelling, I might use a movie like this. There's not a wasted scene. If you think about the structure of that scene, she's at the dumpster, the man comes up, asks for the food. We have a cut immediately to the face of the security guard standing outside. That tells us everything we need to know.
Yeah.
And then we immediately cut inside as they're clocking out
Mm-hmm.
and the confrontation with the manager. There's never any superfluous conversation. He doesn't feel a need to fill spaces and like stretch his runtime. He's just sort of, I showed you this, now I'm going to show you the consequences of this.
Yeah.
But talk more about that solidarity scene. What did you feel about that when the
I
coworkers stood up?
really liked it because it was the two women that were like came from behind were like, well, if you're upset with her, I happen to have like yogurt that expired yesterday, and supposedly by you guys that would have killed someone. And somebody was like, and the like boss was like, well, that's not my fault. Like someone is obviously slacking on the job. And so the older lady besides them go, well, that was me. I was in the dairy section and I must have forgotten it. So you must fire me because I forgot. Well, you don't need to be fired. You've been you confessed. And they're like, what good is a confession if you're just gonna like only reprimand someone that you just happened to caught with an expired sandwich?
And the implication was that like the security guard kind of had it out for Ansa for some reason. Like we can make all kinds of implications. Maybe he asked her out and she said no.
Yeah.
And when we don't really need
Well,
to.
it's also like I love that they tell him good job on like ratting us
Yeah.
out, and he's like, I was just following orders.
Yeah. There's another aspect running through the movie, or let's stay with the working class for a while. And we look at Jalapa's situation. He's fired from his first job in the film because he's drinking on the job.
Yeah.
And it's a construction job, and it makes sense that he would be fired, right? That's dangerous. Then he gets a different kind of job because there's a point where he has a conversation, and I think he's licensed for welding. Is that what it was?
Yeah.
And then he gets a job outside of his licensure, which means he's now outside union protections by doing this. And
Meaning he'll get less less pay.
Yeah.
And this like Hutari is the one that mentions it because he's concerned.
And so I think the difference there is Ansa loses her job because she stood up for something that she believes in.
Yeah.
Jalapa loses his job because he doesn't have control of his life.
Yeah.
And when you look at the arcs of these two characters, Jalapa's arc is a man who he's alone. The living conditions were very interesting to me because it's a trailer like on the construction site.
Yeah.
And then he's sharing with three other guys.
Mhm.
And it just didn't seem like a great place to live. It felt like there's no privacy.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that the bathroom is like a porta potty.
Yeah.
And it's just a pretty miserable existence. So you understand why he drinks so much, but also that this isn't going to like do him any favors long term.
Yeah.
And then just the interactions with bosses. And then Ansa when she works at the restaurant.
It was, yeah, there's like this moment where she's standing there, she's just finished the glasses and she's polishing a tray, and her boss is like, what am I paying you for? You need to go collect more glasses. And it's this like The shots in that karaoke bar, by the way, are so good.
The karaoke bar or the bar she was working at?
She's at there.
Was it the same place?
Yes, it's the same
Oh, okay,
place.
okay. I didn't make that connection.
Because like he goes there to
Oh, that's how,
drink.
yeah, that's how they have their first real meeting.
Yeah, and there's like an image of, I don't know if it's like before, but like his friends in the karaoke, it's lit like almost like orangey and yellow, and then like on the forward is the bar, which is like blue in tint, which shows you the control that this director has with the lighting. Like he's almost going like, yeah, I could put a modern lighting if I wanted to, but I'm not going to.
It's very like comic book cartoon colors.
Yes,
Yeah.
but going back to the working class of her, what were you looking for me to say? Because I'm just like,
Just the nature of that job and how it ends.
oh yeah, because he's like, I'm gonna pay you in cash.
Yeah.
Because she brings him her health certification stuff, like all this stuff indicating that she's valid to work and like, and that she
in the
has
food
good
industry
health.
too. Yeah.
And then he's kind of like, I don't want that. I'll pay you weekly.
But then like he has a side hustle of he's selling drugs out of his.
Yes, and she doesn't say anything because she's just like.
But then the next morning when she comes into work and the place is shut down because it's been raided by the cops.
He tells her to take a few days off and that he would pay her full into like for 2 weeks. But she's like, I was supposed to be paid today for this week.
And then one thing I liked about that scene is the camera is on her and the crowd gathered outside just watching it go down. And you can hear off screen him getting into a fight with the cops. And I think he gets away from them and is running, because then you hear them like running and then like you hear the sirens of the car going off in the distance. Yes. Like he's being chased.
The sound is so good because it's not overbearing. It's just one of those like, hold up, what's going on? And
like once again, that's that economy of storytelling. Is he thought, I don't want to take the time to have 2 shots that we intercut between. How do I communicate what's going on with the boss and the police without showing it to you?
Yeah.
And he does it. That sound is perfect.
Because like Hoopla and her are talking, and so he's kind of like, oh, you must be sad that you lost your job. Let's go get coffee. Like they're having like this sweet interaction where he's like, oh, you must be hungry kind of stuff. And there in the background is her former boss getting to a fist fight, what you assume, and running off.
Yeah. I loved that. The one thing that stood out to me was the constant presence of radio broadcasts about the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Yes.
And it's one of those where, once again, I don't know a lot about Finland, but I do know there is a massive amount of tension between Finland and Russia. And so this thing being ever present, I don't think it's Chris Maki specifically commenting on this specific invasion, but just how this pervasive dread creeps into these people's lives. Because at one point she pulls the plug on her radio because she just doesn't want to listen anymore.
Yeah, I think like she is sitting down with him, like, is it during dinner
that when she's by herself, she does that.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's not related to the power bill either. It's she's sitting there and it's after she's lost her job. I think it's the day after she's lost her job. And I think it's just hearing this is just getting her so down. She's just like, I can't listen to this anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very interesting moment because I think a lot of people can relate to that. You want to be informed, but then you have to decide what are the limits of how informed I want to be and how regularly do I want to be updated, especially if no progress is being made.
And especially it is like this frustrating thing that you unfortunately do have to continue your life as these atrocities happen all around you.
And so often, like as an individual, they're out of your, like she can't do anything about Russia invading Ukraine. She can't stop Russia.
Yeah.
And so she can not like it and she can voice her opinion about it, but ultimately she's just another working class person who's kind of stuck in her position with the limited power that she has. And so I think what she does in order to make the world a better place is to open her heart to someone like Jalapa, who is very alone and very isolated and floating from place to place. He ends up like, I think like at a men's shelter after he gets kicked out of the construction site gig.
I think it's what or
like a YMCA type thing.
He goes to dry out.
And so it's what I loved was it's this movie about these 2 very sad little people who aren't depressing.
No.
It's just their lives are very quiet, sad lives of solitude, right?
Yeah.
There's not a lot of bright spots. The movie has all these bright colors, but them personally, they're very quiet. They don't smile too much. I don't think you ever see their teeth in the movie.
which is really weird when we looked at the cast photos.
Oh yeah,
after.
seeing the actress Alma Poisty who plays Ansa, it's like smiling wide. It is very strange. I do love, speaking of that, the scene where they're walking out of the theater. So we have the guys talking about Robert Bresson, but then Ansa and Palapa, and I think she says, "I've never laughed that much." About
Which is
and
great because we don't see her laugh.
because they see it's a real movie. It's Jim Jarmusch, a film I've never seen. It's a zombie movie.
Yeah.
I heard mixed things about it, and I'm not a huge Jarmusch fan, but I could tell that Kurosaki, this was clearly a nod to someone that is probably a friend of his, a contemporary. But I do love the fact that she talks about how much she laughed. And this is after we've seen them in the theater watching the movie, not even cracking a smile. And so there are these dry little bits of humor that the director puts in there that I really like that style of where he even understands this is a very muted, understated movie. So I have to make jokes about it because it is a little absurd. Similar in a way to like Wes Anderson's.
Yeah, I
work.
do feel like you could if you watch this, you could. I'm not saying that Wes Anderson is.
I would say I think I like Kurosaki better than
Yeah,
Anderson.
I do, but you could understand almost by the influences of this director to understand Wes Anderson better.
What I want to talk about, one of the big differences between an American version of this film and the way it is. I think in an American version of this film, it would be way too overstimulating and loud.
Yeah, I feel like there would be too much discussions about going to go find him.
Or there'd be
And,
too
like-
much, like, I'm thinking if like Wes Anderson made this, the visual flourishes would be so overstimulating, it would take away from just the purity of the human story being told.
Yeah, and there would have to be a moment where like Hoopla like realizes
Palapa, not
Palapa like realizes what he has done and has a conversation about it. Instead, it's a quiet moment for him where it is a decision that he makes on himself. And then he tells her, like, yes, you were an influence.
And so I want to bring this back around to the working class comedy idea and that last line about the dog's name, Chaplin. And I think this is evocative of the types of movies that Chaplin made early on, things like The Kid or Modern Times, where it's a movie that's trying to talk about what it's like to be an average person in the society right now, and not and tell a story that has, little bits of comedy and little heightened elements, but never strays too far from like that core human part of it.
Yeah.
Which is why, like, for me, I think this will be on my top 20 of the year list. I mean, last year there were a lot of movies near the bottom of that list that I might have knocked off if like this movie had come out. This probably would have been on it. Or if I had seen this in 2023, it probably would have been on that list.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's very good. It's available on Mubi right now. You have to have a subscription, but it should be coming to the video on demand options fairly soon. All Dirt Road's Taste of Salt is a decade-spanning exploration of a woman's life in Mississippi and an ode to the generations of people, places, and ineffable moments that shape us. This is produced by Barry Jenkins, has a very Barry Jenkins air to it, but is the debut film of writer-director Raven Jackson. So, Ariana, what did you think of All Dirt Road's Taste of Salt?
I think that it was a film that for her first movie, and this is her first
feature, I believe.
First feature movie, was visually stunning. There is still some rough around the edges shots, in my opinion, but I am glad to have watched it because it was very Terrence Malick.
Yeah, I was at first from seeing the trailer, I thought it was going to be, oh, this is just she's kind of mimicking Barry Jenkins' look. But once I started watching the movie, I was like, oh, no. This is somebody who studied a filmmaker like Terrence Malick. A lot of handheld, a lot of like natural lighting.
Yes.
Very much about the connection between humanity and nature, which is a recurring theme in a lot of Malick's work.
Yes. I feel as if like if Barry Jenkins was, if anything of an influence, was making sure that the colors
Yeah.
were the best that they could be. Because I love that his argument was that the reason that like films that had predominantly a black cast weren't as stunning as films predominantly with a white cast had to do with like film. How digital has allowed him to actually expand versus what actual film is. Because he's like, it just the lighting is not the same as you would do with a white skin tone color.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it is just, there's so many beautiful shots that you'd probably be like, that's a painting, or that could be easily a painting, or oh my God, someone's going to steal this to make a music video out of, that were just entrancing. And you almost wish that the camera would ling a little longer until it got to the close-ups. And even the close-ups were gorgeous. Um, but with the handheld, I feel like there's just some parts that felt like a little jittery, and I don't know if you picked that up. Like,
Yeah, I'd say handheld cinematography is always a hit or miss for me.
yeah,
I always prefer a shot that's like tightly structured and pulled off. I like a lot of tracking shots. I like steady cam. So like something that's just a handheld and you want it to have that kind of like bounce in
yeah,
it.
there's
I don't
not.
necessarily like that all the
I
time.
think it's hard because it's like there's some shots for this that I wish that were more fluid.
Yeah. Well, there's a particular shot I want to talk about that I think
Okay.
is the best shot of the film.
Okay.
And it's really a series of shots with hidden cuts in it. And that's the wedding sequence in the church.
Okay.
I think that is the scene of the film where Jackson pulls off the visuals of the movie like top tier. Because if you remember that shot, it starts with the camera on Mac, who is an adult at this point, I believe, with her father as her sister's getting married. And then the camera kind of it's on the two of them, pulls out, shows the whole congregation. The camera sort of pivots over, shows uh, Josie, the sister, with her new husband being married, and then it kind of moves to the side and looks out the window,
Hmm.
and we see there's like some people standing outside by vehicles. Well, then the camera moves back into the church and there's no one inside, and then it moves to the other window and we see the bride and groom being like, they're throwing rice, they're doing all that stuff, and it's this way of showing the passage of time without just cutting to a scene and then cutting to another scene.
Yes.
There's that it's clear that they are hidden cuts in the way that the camera moves, but they're seamless. So it just feels like, oh, time is passing by in this space. I also want to point out this is a non-linear film.
Yes.
And I think that could cause some frustration with certain audiences because it is a film that demands your attention.
Mm.
Otherwise, you're not going to understand bits of information because there's not a lot of dialogue in the movie, and the
Yeah.
dialogue that's there is very sparse and oftentimes not necessarily about what's happening, but it's just kind of characters talking and you're the one who needs to read the subtext of the scene.
Yeah, you kind of have to. It's kind of like having of all these puzzle pieces all scattered together, and you have to make a picture for yourself what the story is.
But then in that nonlinear storytelling, they juxtapose images that gives them greater meaning.
Yes.
I think of the scene where Mac, it's a baby in the bathtub with her mother.
Yeah.
And that scene is intercut with Mac pregnant, sitting in the bathtub, like rubbing her own belly.
Yes.
And, hearing that, you can immediately understand why these scenes are intercut with each other. It's part of the themes of the film, which is about this sort of the cyclical nature of human existence, right?
It's as if you're in the mind of someone's running memory
Yeah.
of connecting the dots to things. It's a very quiet movie. There's not a lot of dialogue. It's one of the few instances in mostly a black cast and black creator movies where you don't have this sense like, oh God, this is going to be the point that like, the exploitation or racism is really going to
Yeah,
be
there's no
shoved
racism
in
in the
here.
movie.
There's not race like of course they probably like
I mean,
it's
they're
not,
black people in Mississippi,
yeah,
so it's implied that existing in this place, but the film itself is not interested in those themes.
no,
It's interested in the themes of like being a black human.
yes, and there is like this tenderness at the least between the sisters that I kind of appreciate it when the memories start running through, when you start to understand clearly what is going on. Um, this love that they have towards their grandmother that is then correlated back when you realize it's due to the loss of their own mother, and she comes to be a replacement for them.
Well, and my question about the loss of the mother, and I feel like the film played it very nuanced. Did she take her own life? Or I don't remember them really articulating the
I think it
circumstances.
had to do
She's got sick, maybe?
I think she drowned.
Oh, and that makes the connection back to the water.
Yes.
They're constantly coming back to the water in the movie.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it's like they send Mac to go check on, he's like, go check on your mom, and from afar you see like the body like laying on the ground, and it's supposed to be the area where the mom would like do catfish, and suddenly she's just laying there.
Uh, the film, we're talking about the juxtaposition of images. There's a triad of images that we see in the film between Mac and then who's kind of her, it was a boy that she connected with when she was young, but then drifted away, Wood.
Yes.
And the three hugging scenes. Because I counted there were three in the movie.
Yes.
And the first scene is Mac as a grown adult. She's a manager at like a supermarket or a store of some kind.
We don't really know because they're pretty good at like not letting us see a name tag.
And he comes by while she's on her break. And there's this palpable sense of like mourning in the relationship that never was. Because she mentions how he's married and he has kids and he lives somewhere else now.
And there's this longing, and then like there's this shot of them holding hands that you almost feel the pressure of his hand on hers.
Where she kind of like coughs a little, yeah,
like
because he's squeezing.
Yeah, like and like finally they do hug each other, and the thread of it is always showing when his hand is wrapped around her waist, like on the back,
and how he holds her.
Yes.
And this was like desperation, is what it felt like.
Yes.
Of if only I could go back to that time and I could change things. And the next time we see is when their sort of young romance first kind of blossoms.
Yes.
Where it's the embrace of like lust, kind of is. It's implying that, oh, and then just a little later we see him like leading her through the tall grass with a towel, and we all know what's going to happen off camera, right? And then the last time we see them hug, not chronologically, but in the way the film shows us, is she's found out she's pregnant. And he's talking about all the great things he's going to do. And she's being very quiet. And I wondered what you read about, because the film, once again, because it's told out of sequence and there's no exposition in this movie, really.
Yeah.
What do you read the story of their relationship as? Like, what do you think happened?
I think that because she got pregnant so young, she didn't want to hold him back. And because like I remember that because he was just like, oh, we can do this all together. Like we can do this together.
It's a very rose-colored glasses.
And she's just kind of like, she already comes from a very poor family. She already knows the sacrifice that has to be made. And she's like, we can't do this. And it's like, it is really sad because it's like, we have the implications of what this was.
And the thing is, we see that scene near the end of the movie when already in like the first act of the movie, we saw them reunited years later when he comes back into town.
Yeah.
And so we know that that relationship never gets a happy ending.
Yeah, because he tells her like, okay, so you can walk yourself home and you'll be okay, right? And that is like the soul crushing part because it's like, because the way that he treats her, it's obvious like, oh, he used to walk her home to make sure that he was safe, but now he's like, I can't bear you walk through that door, and that to know that you'll never come out like into the world with me. And especially when they meet as adults, he is kind of like, oh, I didn't think I would find you here.
Yeah. And it's a film that lingers.
Yeah.
I think that's a great verb to describe this movie. Is it's a lingering film.
I feel like it won't attach to you as a way unless you start talking about it the way that we're talking about it right now.
Because it is a film full of mundane images on the surface. Like they're beautiful images, but what the people are doing in them is not anything that like will excite you. It's people sitting on a porch. It's people holding hands. It's a little girl sticking her hand in the water of a pond. I think there's a tactile nature to the movie.
Yes.
It's a movie where everything has a texture, it has a feeling. So when she's, running her fingers in the mud of the pond and it's clouding up the water, like that's something that you feel when you watch the movie. And also relates back to that recurring story that they keep talking, or it's that sort of idea that they keep talking about is we came from the dirt, coming back to that like biblical, Adam was formed out of the earth kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Uh, and so because death is looming over the movie, birth is looming over the movie, you have that element. That's where I feel that she's trying to kind of talk about how every life just kind of like leads into the next life, and it's just this
Yeah,
endless stream of people, and all we have left is like our memories of those people, and eventually then our memories go because we're not there to have them anymore.
well, it's like the ending scene where she's sitting down with Lily and they're talking about the rain. She's like, "You're always out, like, Auntie, you're always out here when it's raining." And she's just like, "I like the rain." And she's like, "Do you want to know a secret? Like, nothing really ends, it just changed shape."
I also think it's a movie that reminded me of a film that came up in conversation recently, Jean Diamant,
Yeah.
the Chantal Akerman movie, which is another film of mundane images focused on the female experience and about trying to find like meaning inside those images. Uh, I think All Dirt Road's Taste of Salt is much more. I wouldn't say it's more experimental than Jean Dielman because Jean Dielman is a chronological film, and that's part of
Yeah.
why that movie works. Is it goes in order. It's not a dream; it's a ritual.
Yes.
And this movie is a dream, I think, is what you're watching. You're watching a dream because we only get one scene of old Mac
Yeah.
at the river. And the question is all of this old Mac remembering, or is this Mac at different points in her life remembering things and how
Yeah.
those memories had other memories happening within them?
Mhm.
And so it just becomes this. I think it was the Southern writer Eudora Welty who pushed this idea of like life as this kind of confluence of things, that life is mostly just a bunch of chaotic things, and the meaning that you make of it is what comes from you, is how you see the connections between things.
Mhm.
And that's what this feels like, is a lot of things like happen to Mac, but it's Mac's like responsibility to find meaning in those things.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they don't have meaning. And the idea is, well, if they don't have meaning, that's okay too. But like, she wants to make sense of the life that she's lived, is the sense that I get. What's interesting is that the actress who plays adult Mac, Charlene McClure,
Mhm.
is not an actress from what I read. She is a poet, an award-winning poet.
Oh.
What did you think of her performance in the movie, being someone who isn't, their primary occupation is not actor?
I thought that she did very well. I think it's that mix of not having a lot of dialogue. It is a movie that feels so much about yearning in different ways, of wanting, uh, and her facial expressions, like when she meets with the older version of Wood, it is just heartbreaking to watch the man that she might have like loved deeply and having to be like, "Well, I have to let you go."
When she's the one who brings up his wife and kids.
Yeah, she's like, "Oh, how old are your kids?" He's like, 4 and 6 months. And
Uh,
he like repeats it twice.
and what did you think of Sheila Atim, who played her mother, who I feel was a character that was almost as important as Mac, but more mysterious than Mac because it's someone outside of Mac's own consciousness, which is
Well,
where the
it's
movie
also
comes
like
from.
her lifespan is so short within Mac's life.
Yeah,
And
and Mac outlives her.
yeah, and it's also like just the strength that she seems to carry herself versus like the father, but it's also like how intimidating she is.
Well, that actress, I first saw her in, I think we both first saw her in Barry Jenkins' The Underground Railroad,
Yeah.
where she plays the main character's mother in that.
Mm-hmm.
And she has this very Grace Jones look to her,
Yes.
which
Like,
I always think of this regal stature. It's someone who's like, when you meet them, you would immediately be intimidated by them.
yes, but I think the intimidation also comes because Mac at some point is trying to get her attention, and there's a party at the house, and she scolds her, saying like, "Don't smoke unless you're spoken to," which shuts Mac down immediately. And you could see like this little pained look in this girl's eye that all she wanted was her mother's attention, and her mother is just like basking in the attention of everyone else at the party at the house.
I also appreciated that this is a type of Black experience I don't think we get on film much, which is the rural Black experience.
Yeah.
And there's so many urban Black films. And there's a reason for that, because there's a lot of Black people that live in urban spaces and they have stories to tell. But I think there is something important to see. That's one of the reasons I kind of like Glover's Atlanta, was because he would do those episodes that took us outside of the city into the country.
Yeah.
To emphasize that Black people also are part of the land, and they're also part of agriculture, and they're also part of fishing.
Yeah.
And they are involved in these things, despite the way a lot of media tries to kind of shift where people belong and where people don't belong. What did you think of the way the film approached the connection between its characters and its environment?
I really liked the way it was done because it made it obvious, like the most times that maybe she felt connected to herself or to the people around her was almost focused on the earth or understanding. Like there's a moment, like one of the first scenes is Mac petting a catfish that is caught in a trap. And her father isn't like, he's not scolding, he's just like, you better not be letting that catfish free.
Yeah.
And he takes it away, and then there's like a next scene where she's sitting in the kitchen with her mother, and her mother's explaining where she would start to descale the catfish and where she would cut next for butchering. And there is this patience that we don't really see on screen, which is them allowing her to look closely at the catfish, appreciate it before she needs to start cutting.
And there we have that theme of death right away.
Yes.
Like, death is a part of our continued existence,
Mm-hmm.
where it's for us to continue to survive, things must die.
Yeah.
And also, I love the way the young girl who played Mac, there was this fear, this like hesitance of not wanting to like cut,
Mm-hmm.
because that makes it real. Like you're taking apart a thing that was alive. And that's something that like I've never had to like butcher or fillet anything. But I could understand how, if you're a child and it's the first time you've done it, it's a type of power you've never had that's like scary.
Yeah.
Because you're like, if I can do this and be okay with it, what other things could I do and be okay with that scare me right now and maybe I shouldn't be okay in doing? But yeah, it's a great coming of age film, but a very challenging movie. I don't think if you're someone who likes your movie straightforward, you're going to need to have patience with this movie, because it's not there to tell you a story, Mac as a kid, Mac as a teenager, Mac as an adult. It's all of that mixed together.
Yeah, but the good thing is that it's about an hour and 37 minutes, so you don't feel as if you're going to be wasting a huge chunk of time. It's just a quiet film.
Would you recommend All Dirt Roads Taste of Salt to the audience?
Yes, I do.
I would say if you're up for that challenge, or you're just wanting a piece of Black media that's different than a lot of the other Black media that we have, I think it's a really good choice. Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode of the Pop Cult Podcast. Make sure to check out our show notes for any links to relevant things we talked about, including to our website, popcult.blog. Make sure that you subscribe wherever it is you listen to this podcast so that you'll be notified when new episodes are up. If you visit popcult.blog, you're going to find more reviews. We just reviewed the Showtime series The Curse, which was quite interesting to watch. We're coming up on our last week of our Palestinian film series. We'll be looking at 3 more films out of that country. We're also doing a Patreon voting round for what our February film series will be. So right now, the patrons are going to be deciding between silent film masterworks, movies about movies, or the works of Satyajit Ray, which is a director I've never really delved into before. If you enjoy what we do here on the podcast and you enjoy what we do over on popcult.blog, I'd like to encourage you to support us on Patreon if you can. I want to thank our current patrons, Becca and Matt, who donate at the writer's room level. When you donate at that level, it's $10 or higher a month, you will get to pick one movie that we will watch and review. No matter what level you donate at on the Patreon, you will get access to our patron-exclusive podcasts. We just recently wrapped up a 6-part tabletop role play without a GM that Ariana and I did called Screenplay, and we had a lot of fun with that. And we think we're going to be doing another season of that coming up in March with a different game, different characters, different story that I think a lot of people are really going to like. And we just hope that you enjoy what we're making over there. Well, you keep listening and we'll keep watching.